So what we've got here, ladies and gentlemen, is what we now call as, this is like the beta name for it. It's probably not going to be the final name, but it's just called GTM Evolution, because from having worked with and observed a bunch of B2B technology companies, what we found was that they sort of correlate to one of four stages according to maturity. And what do we mean by maturity? Well, we see that the most mature companies are the ones using multiple channels and targeting buyers and taking them on their journey throughout the entire life cycle. And their go-to-market is also increasingly value-driven as opposed to being transaction-driven, okay? So to put this into context, when a company starts out, what usually happens, this is the general scenario, is that the first thing they do is the CEO and the founder goes out and starts selling, starts making calls. You know, they go to their connections and they're like, here's my product. Do you think it's good? Do you want to buy it? Do you want to test it? Whatever. So what they're doing is they're using a single channel and they're not offering pretty much anything besides the use of the product to later to sell the product. So it's pretty transaction driven. Okay. And as they build their go-to-market engine, what happens is that companies usually add multiple channels and usually add value and don't just concentrate on selling, but they try to, build up their funnel or pipeline using demand generation. Now, the unfortunate thing is a lot of companies don't do this consciously, so it's not a conscious evolution. In fact, they're not even aware of the fact that there is such a process and evolution. And they just, try to expand on more tactics and techniques. And they're not really conscious of these two dimensions. And then many of them get stuck at some place. Okay. And so having observed and looked at and studied a bunch of companies, and I don't want to lie about the number, about how many, but we did have and have had conversations with, like, deeper conversations with several dozen companies. So we were able to observe this firsthand throughout our work. And so we identified four stages, and these four stages are important because once you recognize where you are, then you have a more or less clear path on how to move forward and advance up towards maturity. Because why would you want to do that? Because the further along the line you are, so the further up and to the right you are in this chart, in this matrix, the better your productivity, the efficiency, your brand, like all your pipeline numbers. So things just start getting better and better the more you are to the up and the right. Okay, so now let's take a look at these four typologies, these patterns that converge into these four archetypes, we call them. Okay, so here are the archetypes. The first one is the hunter. Okay, and it's all the way down and to the left because this is when you have one or very few salespeople. Marketing is almost non-existent, and people are just going out there using one or two channels and trying to get calls or demos in order to sell the fastest way possible. Okay, so that's the hunter. And the hunter is a good archetype because the hunter goes out in the morning. They know that there's some animals and game in the woods. They're not sure what they're going to shoot down. They don't necessarily have a plan. Of course, they have some tactics. They sort of know, they might know where they are. If you go to the creek, then you'll find animals there drinking at dawn. But they don't really have a game plan. They are pretty much restricted by what's within walking distance. And they just hunt whatever they can so that they can put food on the table that day. And then it starts the next day. Okay. So while most companies start out in the hunter stage, it's something that you want to bypass as fast as possible. And then along comes the sailor. And what does the sailor do? Well, with the sailor, we use the sailor analogy because the sailor has tools. They have tools for navigation on how they want to get across the ocean. But if you think about it, they are pretty restricted. And they are restricted by something called the wind. So they cannot go from one place to the other with anything else but with wind and currents. But currents usually screw up the route. So currents work against them. And sailors usually know where they want to get, and they just use the winds to sail in whatever direction they deem optimal in order to get to their point. Now, they are pretty restricted, as opposed to having a motorboat, which will go anytime, anywhere if there's enough fuel in it. But, the sailor is able to plan and is able to use more than one channel. Okay, so it's a bit more sophisticated than a hunter and gatherer who does this day to day. And there's a lot more intention behind what a sailor is doing. Are you with me so far? Do you have questions, objections? So the third one we've got here, the third archetype, is the knight. And why do we use the knight? Because the knight is connected, and they have more than one way of getting what they want. As opposed to the hunter, the knight is not going to go hunting usually. The knight is going to instruct the hunters. So the knight has several channels and means and everything else available to them. The knight can get into politics even with the king and with the court. And so the knight has some pretty sophisticated tools, as well as strength, as well as, friends and acquaintances who can help the knight get what they want. Okay. And they do not hunt, they do not sail themselves, they get other people to do that for them. Okay, so it's a much better position. And when it comes to GTM, the knight will be a lot more, in this archetype stage, you will be a lot more value driven than in the previous stages, okay, because you have just more things available. But there is a last stage that you want to evolve to, and that is the wizard. And the wizard's going to be like way up here. So I'm intentionally putting this way up here because it's such a qualitative jump from the other three that the wizard is really where you want to be getting with your GTM. Okay. And we call it the wizard because they can make it look like magic. And the returns that you get on your go-to-market efforts will be exponential and almost unexplainable or inexplicable. Okay, so that's why the wizard stage is something that that is what we're aiming for. And what happens in the wizard stage and go to market? Well, over there in the wizard stage, what you have is a combined revenue department. Okay, so sales, marketing, and customer success, they all fall under one leadership and one strategy, and they share metrics among themselves. Okay, at this stage, you are also present on a variety of channels. You are doing full life cycle marketing and sales, meaning that marketing and sales isn't only tasked with getting people in the door through the front door, but is also actively present in the later stages of the customer's life cycle to get them to stick and to spend more with the company and to retain them. So marketing and sales have a broader role there. Customer success is a lot more actively involved, and they're using value. And the reason it's so scalable is because go-to-market, so sales and marketing aren't really transaction-driven, but they're value-driven. And the mediums that you use and the way you get people through the front door becomes a lot more scalable because you're targeting buyers a lot earlier in their buying cycle. So you get bigger numbers through the front door, and you're able to convert them and move them down the pipeline. Okay, so this is our first attempt at explaining GTM evolution and archetypes. And let me know if you have questions and analogies.
On the axis, I really like how the names have been arranged, like from hunter all the way to wizard, because what really matters is that it starts from hunter, which is not just who you are, but also how you're perceived within your team or within an organization. Because you start out as a hunter, and the perception is, yes, you get stuff done and you go out there and you work, you try your very best. It's not that a hunter works any lesser than a wizard does. It's just the difference in skill set that they have. So a hunter going out there and getting its prey, it's unrefined, savage almost in terms of what the process looks like. And Then when they go to Sailor, they have direction. So Hunter goes out there aimless, just trying to look at the prey and trying to find it, whereas a Sailor has direction. But a Sailor, in a lot of ways, is a victim to his or her circumstances, where the wind and everything else that's not in their control controls the environment and hence controls what happens to them. And then the third step is the Knight, where you're respected, where you're looked up to, where what you're getting done is not just a control of your environment, but also your skill set. And the ultimate level is the Wizard, where it's very easy to assume that when magic happens, it's because you're born with this talent or you're just like great at magic. But magic, in essence, is years of practice, where to somebody else who's not experienced, it can look like, oh, you're performing magic, but it's actually just skills. So I like how it's a rise in status almost of first you're looked at as a hunter and then you're looked at as a wizard. Also in terms of your status, your skill set, everything. So I like how that progression